Thank you all. So nice to be here. I am indebted to Frank, who is an amazing person with his interest in science and his love of music and his real interest in forwarding music. I'm so grateful, and I'm grateful to Professor Birchnall and the University of Georgia at Athens and all of you for being here. So to explain a little bit of what my background is, I taught for many years in the Ann Arbor, Michigan area, and I had a studio of 40 musicians with whom I worked almost every week for 1 hour. And these students were not enrolled with me because I was teaching independently of the University of Michigan, but these individuals wanted a high level of musical training, and because I'd studied in Paris and had the fixed solfège method and I knew about the French training, I was asked if I would tutor. And I had an unusual background because I was somebody with relative pitch who was always competing with people with absolute pitch. So one of the things that you can, I'm sure, appreciate is that it's quite frustrating for those of us with relative pitch to be able to keep up with those who do not have that. So absolute pitch is this ability to hear a pitch out of nowhere and be able to identify it. And it's a wholly different way of perceiving music than for those of us who are not relying on that, but are rather relying on our ability to hear musical intervals. So one of the ways I got started with my students, just a few of them at the beginning, was I would do this little test. And you folks, if you will, just participate like they would. I'm just going to ask you to tell me what you think these intervals are that I'm playing. I don't want you at all to worry about it being right or wrong. Just mostly it's just sort of to get us started, okay? So if I play this, what's that? Very good. What's this? That was a perfect fourth. Good. So one, good. Minor second, good. What's this? Pardon? Good. That's fine. Okay, good. Could you guys speak up? By the way, throughout this whole thing, thank you, because that'll be real important. So to speak up. What I will be helping you to do is be able to do that. So don't worry if you don't know it. That's my job, is to help you do that. So what about this one? Good. What about this one? Good. Major second. Good. What about this one? Good.
Major third.
Actually, perfect fifth. Okay, a little bit more difficult. Now, tell me what these intervals are. So by the way, this is a typical test that would be given for people in their recognition. In fact, they would usually be given 10 questions, and they'd say, number 1. Again, and you'd write it down. Major second. Number 2. You know, like we just did. And you get to hear it twice and you write it down, all right? Then they would do this. Tell me what the intervals are now. Perfect fourth, okay, a little bit less fast. What's this? Good, excellent. Ladder? Major six, good, okay. What's this one? Minor seventh, good. What's this one? Tritone, okay, good. Now tell me what each interval is that I'm playing in this melody. So you'll, for example, fourth, major second, minor third, major third, second, major second, all right? Okay, here we go.
You have lost.
I proved my point, okay? So the irony is somebody with absolute pitch is hearing D, G, A flat, D flat. It seems silly. There are only 12 pitches. What's your problem? Like, can't you tell yellow from green, blue from purple? What's your problem? And those of us with relative pitch, does this make sense to learn how to do this? What is that interval? It doesn't relate to what music is actually about, which is that you have to be able to perceive it in real time. You have to be able to perceive it in the flow of music. And this is what makes it so challenging, is that we're really often not taught how to recognize these things by their sound. So I bet you are relying on some of these procedures. They're usually these ways of learning how to recognize musical intervals. The most popular one is what are called tune bites. Okay, so that means to recognize a perfect fourth, it's Here Comes the Bride. Okay, to be able to recognize this, you know, Maria, okay? Maybe you learned this. Minor third, that's the beginning of the Star-Spangled Banner. Okay, so you learn to associate a particular interval with a familiar melody. To me, this is circular thinking, because how do you recognize the melody and sing it correctly when you don't know what the intervals are? Okay, so I haven't met one person yet. I've had a lot of people who have sent me students who they think are tone deaf. And I'll do this. And there's just not one person that doesn't go like that. And yet that melody was only off by one half step at the end. So at some level, the brain understands what these intervals are. It's just we're not conscious of how. But we're also not taught how as children. So it's really about what is the character of this sound that makes it so that we recognize it as Here Comes the Bride. You all perceived that when I played the two pitches together, man, now with the tune bite, you have to take the two pitches apart and figure out what the tune bite is, unless you learn that this was, and you recognize it as the beginning of Chopsticks as a major second. So what I wanted to do was to understand what the mind was thinking, that it already understood what the intervals were, so that we could sing the Star-Spangled Banner, that we don't know anything about pitches and intervals. That we understand these things in the same way we understand when we eat what things taste like, but we may not know what the ingredients are. But imagine in your life if you were never taught the flavor of sour, the difference between an orange and a lemon, the difference between vinegar and peanut butter. We were not taught how to recognize musical sounds. Now, ironically, what I find is that people with absolute pitch often were trained to recognize those pitches, that very often their parents would play games with them where they'd say, okay, what's this note? You can see it on the internet now. You can go and find little brilliant children that, you know, their parents trained them from the time they're like little birds. Age of 2, they go, okay, that's a sol. This is a mi. What's this? Sol. You know, and they get so that they can tell the names of the notes, all 12 of them, like nothing. But their brain, they were taught to have that sound go with that particular name. Let me ask you, how many of you, before the age of 5, were taught the sound qualities of individual pitches? Raise your hand. How many of you were taught the sound properties of the 11 musical intervals that we use all the time to recognize tunes? Nobody. But yet, we're musicians. So really what I'm going to be very strident, especially as I get older, and say that this has got to stop. All right, there are sound properties, and that what we have to do is recognize what the characteristics are of those sound properties. Now, what makes it amazingly challenging is the adult brain doesn't do this kind of thing easily. Imagine if you were never taught the difference between orange and lemon. Never. And then suddenly, as an adult, now you have to tell the difference between limes and oranges and lemons and papayas and all of these. You had not been taught those flavors. So it'd be hard because neurologically, the brain's connections between words and sound, sensation, and their symbolic code, what they're called. We haven't done that. So let's change it. Okay, we're going to be doing that together. So over the years, what I had to do first was recognize that my students, if they were in a head-to-head competition with somebody with absolute pitch, and they had to do what I just did with playing a note up a fourth, up a minor second, up a perfect, they had to do it like that. And if they couldn't, in many places, and you may have had this experience, you're just wiped out. It's basically thought that you have no career, you have no talent. And in fact, in Asia, it's quite common to say that by the age of 5, if you do not have absolute pitch, you really probably shouldn't waste your money. and the government won't as much support you. Taiwan, very much that way as well. So in many places, if you don't have absolute pitch, it's kind of game over. But you wouldn't get absolute pitch if you weren't taught the names of those pitches and the sounds. I don't know about you, but I didn't even have a piano, and nobody was telling me what the names of the pitches were. Now, what made my life a little different than my students was that I was fortunate that as a child, my dad was stationed in Paris. And so when I was only about 5, 6, and 7 years old, I was actually taught the sound of musical intervals using something different than tune bites. And that is what is called what I call the affective model. That is, a di-chord has a unique personality. So for example, that'd be a clown. It feels jumbly and bumbly and jumping around, and yet it's kind of positive and happy. This, on the other hand, minor second or semitone, half step, that is like an asp, that nasty little snake that killed Cleopatra, okay? Just really deadly and sharp. On the other hand, there's this. Yeah, it's much smoother. But I thought of it as, and I was taught that it was a warrior. It has this sort of quality of being scrutinizing, thinking, wondering, versus this, which while also very smooth and calm, feels like it's meditative or contemplative and sort of open, so a monk. So that these all had kind of characters. Now the problem is recognizing monks, asps, and all of this other stuff really in a fast melody or harmony. It's kind of impracticable. Okay, now you create yourself some kind of funny image. So ultimately what I had to do was figure out what is it about this sound, let's say, that makes it feel like a monk. And this sound like a warrior, and this sound like a clown, and this like an asp, and this like, but almost all of us would recognize as the devil, okay? Satan, Lucifer, okay? Because it's all over. So I liked that model that I was taught because I had an advantage over most of my American friends, and that is that I had been exposed to that when I was really young. So, but I also knew there's something to it as a composer. I mean, I know when I write something like this, I'm going to elicit a very particular response, and it's quite different than this. And it's because, therefore, of not so much the pitches, but the musical intervals. That is, the distances between pitches have a character. So I think most people are willing to acknowledge that pitches have character. In fact, Dr. Diana Deutsch at University of Southern California would say that there are chroma for each pitch. Each pitch has its own color, and she has absolute pitch, so she understands. So people with absolute pitch recognize the chroma of individual pitches, that a G has a different quality than a D. And most of us are like, okay, well, yeah, I got to sing it, I got to play it on the piano and check it. But these folks were taught that often at a very young age to look at that, and their brain did it naturally. But almost no one talks about the fact that musical intervals have a chroma, that is, that there's a color. But how in the world are all of us going to get so that we can identify consciously what we're hearing in time if we cannot master musical intervals? If we cannot get so that we can just recognize them instantly, and then, more importantly, appreciate their affective import. That is, what makes a perfect fifth have that quality that communicates this, and why. And it's so different than, let's say, this. By the way, you know what this is, you opera singers? Almost always the chord that's used in a recitative, usually after a slow aria. Okay? It's actually a chord that's used in the first inversion, in major triad, and usually it's after something like, you have. right. Yay, Mozart. So the idea is that he knows exactly what he's doing. Now I want to play that same thing. By the way, that was called a major chord, but it's kind of surprising if here we are, we've been lulled to sleep. Now I'm going to put this chord in root position. Same chord. sounds sort of dead, versus this one. It's like I do this with lemon water on your face, and it wakes you up. And the reason that it does that is because of what the intervals are above the bass note. Now, what I want to show you is an observation I made. And that is that I noticed that dissonant intervals, I don't care how far apart they are, have a sound property that is the same. What that is not just bad and ugly and rough. That doesn't help anything, because actually it's a value judgment that jazzers would be really upset by. There's something really cool about this. And that's got a dissonant interval in it. So the definition of good and bad is a subjective judgment, and that doesn't help us to define it. That's like saying orange is good and lemon is bad. But that's not true. Orange is orange and lemon is lemon. So what I found was the dissonant intervals manifest as a rhythmic pulsation of 8 hertz. That is, it sounds like it's a tambourine, okay? Now, the thirds and the sixths, those poor guys, they get the category in theory of being called imperfect consonant intervals. And of course, when I was first teaching, I wasn't going to ask my students to say imperfect consonants, or even imperfect. I don't want to call it imperfect because it doesn't sound imperfect. It actually sounds very beautiful. What I found was, in fact, thirds and sixths, that would be like the C to the E. The thirds and sixths, as we'll talk about, those guys actually have 4 hertz. So when I play a minor third, now listen to the dissonant. 8, 8, 8, 8, 4, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll do a little exercise on it. Now, guess what happens here? Perfects. Right, 2. And it has nothing to do with the tuning of the piano, believe me. This is completely different, okay? So this is, and in fact, my physicist friends want to just kill me because I say, I'm sorry, but it's up here, still 8 hertz. And up here, it's still 4 hertz. And I'm sorry, but it's still 2 hertz. And this far apart, still 2 hertz versus 8 hertz. So I'm going to do a little exercise. It isn't really music. For you folks back there that might have had a little bit more trouble, you did great, at telling dissonant from perfect, I'm going to do an exercise. This is about a beat per second, okay? So if I do this, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, that's perfect. 1, perfect, 1, perfect, 1. You'll answer on the offbeat. Say what that is. If I do this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you're going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, dissonant, 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 1, perfect, 1, perfect. Okay, give it a whirl, all right? So you can see those words up there, okay? So if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1, 1. Now I'm going to go a little bit faster. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1, 1. Dissonant, 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 dissonant. Perfect, 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 dissonant, dissonant. Okay, so you're hearing perfectly. And this is what is really important to say. We're hearing just fine. It's just knowing what we're supposed to be hearing. I believe our musical ear is like it's far greater than the Hubble telescope, which sees into the vast universe, okay? We cannot with our eyes see that consciously. We use that incredible tool. The thing is, imagine if you didn't have software that could decode what it's perceiving, so to say. what it's picking up. It doesn't mean it doesn't see, it just means you don't have the communication to be able to say what it is that it's seeing. So it's the same thing, we just really have to be, like you just did, programming in these very essential things that your brain already knew. I need to say this, you didn't know it before, but now you do. And I hope it'll start feeling like, oh, I always knew that. It's not true, but in a way, your metaconscious mind did know that all the time, all right? And I would never have learned it without you, okay? People like you. So now, let's do modal. Okay, so modal's going to be 4 hertz. So if I go like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, dissonant, 1, 2, 3, 4, dissonant, 1, 2, 3, 4, dissonant, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Good. Excellent. And of course, those are all correct. And if you had a little stint in there, it would be understandable. But that was fantastic. So the idea is that you can feel that the modal feels very pleasant. All right? So now let's do modal versus perfect. Okay? Got to make sure that we know how each one of them relates. So here we go. In a moment, the most important thing is going to happen, which is how this rhythm transforms into expression. Okay, that's the most important thing. All right, so let's do this. If I go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 1. And you know what that is. It's not either of them. So what's this? What's this? Good. Good. So what's this one? So it's keep thinking think of the rhythm. Modal. Louder. Perfect. Really loud. Perfect. Don't need to be shy. Perfect. Perfect. Think just the rhythm. Let it go. Modal. Don't try. Perfect. Good. Good. This time, try to answer really loudly. So understandably, it's like, wow, am I doing this, or is this right, or whatever. The thing that you're really doing when you're speaking loudly is you're acknowledging in your own mind that you're hearing something. And it's really important that it's not tentative. It's not like, ooh, this is orange, and well, this is lemon. Yeah, they're very different. Okay, so here we go. All right, let's do this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. 1. Perfect. 1. Perfect. Okay. All right. And so this is exactly as it should be. It is harder to tell modal from perfect than to tell any of the others. Okay, it's harder to tell the modal from the perfect. And what's wonderful about this is it might explain our ancient theories that come way back from, Boethius, way back in the Roman era. So what we see is that actually the modal and the perfects are more similar, and the dissonant is separate, and that's really important. That's why at first the consonant intervals were called perfect consonances and then imperfect consonances. The perfect consonances are going to be the perfect fourth, we'll talk about these again, the augmented fourth and its diminished fifth name, and the perfect fifth, okay? So the modal ones are major and minor thirds and major and minor sixths. Okay, so those are still very beautiful, as you know. Ask yourself to be kind of an eagle vision. And what I mean by that is you want to really get so that you can just perceive all of these elements together. Okay, so that you're looking at, you can be like an eagle and just watching the action. And you notice when I switch off, just let your ear tell you what it is. Okay, so let's give it a whirl. All right, notice when I play something that sounds better than dissonant, slower than dissonant, the brain will go, it's slower. But is it 1, 2, which is modal, or is it 1, perfect? The shapes of the, in the words are meant to actually be pictographs to display that. I wish they could be, we could rope one of these wonderful tech people into making it animated, because it'd be so neat if the dissonant were moving at 8 hertz and the modal were moving at 4 hertz. So they have the softer edges, and then the perfect boom, yeah, moving at 2 hertz. That's why they have the straight edges, okay? So here we go. So this will help to act as an anchor, all right? And 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1, perfect, 1. You always get Murphics, you know, Podals and Murphics, so don't feel bad about it, okay? It happens every time. So just let yourself relax. Actually, you're working too hard. So it's going to be 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, dissonant, 1, 2, 3, 4, dissonant, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1. Excellent. Okay, here we go. So think of it as truly as if I'm playing the rhythm. Dissonant, 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 1, 2, 3, 4, dissonant, dissonant, modal, 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 perfect, 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 perfect. Dissonant, dissonant, modal. Good. The natural thing for a really smart adult person to do is to try to think about it. But that won't help you, because it's actually just letting go. If I know that it's modal, I know it could be either a third or a sixth. Everybody, a third would be like from the C up to the E. A sixth is going to be a C up to an A. Here's my C up to an E is a third, and it's called that because I got count 1, 2, 3. And then up a sixth would be C, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's going to have 4 notes in between the two. What I would find is that there's another factor, which I call the fundamental octave polarity factor. And what I mean by that is that the ear seems to be able, I know it's hard to believe, to tell where the nearest manifestation is of the bottom pitch. Okay? So that if I have a C and an E, that E is going to go down to the C because it's closer. But if I go C up to A, the C that's closest is actually the one up here. That's a third away. All right, now let me show you what I mean. So you're going to feel, when you hear 2 pitches together, that the upper pitch refers or seems to look down. I think it's almost a magnetic thing. And then that a sixth, the upper pitch tends to want to look up. And that's very important in terms of, your opera arias. When a composer puts in a large interval, it means something very different than when they use smaller ones. One is much more dramatic, but they're still the same basic character. So here we go. Listen to this. I'm going to take out the top note. In a sixth, if I remove it, it's going to this pitch. Here. So if you're hearing that at all, that's awesome, all right? But believe me, your metaconscious brain is already perceiving it anyway. Okay, that was clear. So let me show you, though, something that's even one of my favorite party gimmicks. Okay, so here, mostly again, just to show off how wonderful the musical ear is only. If I play this note, C, and I play this note, B, a major seventh higher, so it's way the heck up there to that B, from that C, way up there to the next, close to the next one. Now I'm going to remove the upper note, and of course, we hear the resolution that it wants to go to that note. Now the party trick is this. I'm going to be playing my C and B with my left hand. With my right hand, I'm going to play the octave above that C. So it's going to be a half step higher than that upper note in my left hand. So C, B, C. I'm going to play it very, and then you'll hear it. This is, I'm playing it now. and you want to see me, I'm playing it. Can you guys attest to the fact that I'm playing it? Okay? Right, now watch. I'm not playing it. Is there much difference? Playing it? Not playing it. Okay? So, yeah, I know it is. So, and it's just something that the ear does very naturally, and it's so important because it tells us why notes tend in certain directions, why they're pulled in certain directions. And it's because the brain, I think, is always trying to reference where a pitch is in relationship to the bottom pitch or its octave partial. Where is it setting? Is it somewhere in the middle? And if it's in the middle, it's going to be perfect. Is it somewhere a little bit closer? Or up here, a little bit closer? Those are the modal ones. And then the ones that are dissonant are the ones that are right next to it. Those are the dissonances. But this means that I can now tell whether it's a second or a seventh, because the upper note, just if you put yourself kind of between the two pitches, it just settles down. Here versus this. Right, and so it has this sense of yearning, you know, that's happening when it's a seventh. And so this is the second factor that we're going to be observing. So in this thing, what I have is that these are the seconds, but you see the seventh is right next to the octave. Doesn't look much like a seven, as a matter of fact. Seventh. So, and here are the thirds, a little bit further away, and then the fourths and the fifths. And what we can see is that the closer we are to the fundamental, the more active the sound. And the farther away, the clearer the sound. All right? So, tell me whether I'm playing a second or a seventh. Real loud, second.
Second, 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 seventh, 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 second, 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 seventh, seventh.
Awesome. Good. Good. All right. Now, the next thing that we're going to talk about is telling a third from a sixth, because now that we know it's modal, well, yeah, but is it the third that's closer to that note, or is it the sixth that's closer to that? And here we go. This is the third versus the sixth. Right, okay? So third, and they're moving at 4 hertz, so that we're now getting two factors put together. We're making a kind of a cookie dough, okay? We're just adding more ingredients. So the ingredients we're adding now is this pulling towards the fundamental, which is crucial. So now the third is going to have the modal edges, and the sixth is going to have the modal edges, but they're pulling, one's pulling this way, one's pulling that way, okay? So which one is this? Third, real loud, third.
Third, third,
Even louder, third.
third, sixth, 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 third, 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 sixth, sixth.
Excellent. Awesome. Okay. Now, let's put together second, third, sixth, or seventh. Now, to do this, you have to be able to perceive both the factors we've discussed, but that's no big deal. You can hear that it's modal, 4 hertz, therefore it's going to be a third or a sixth, and you'll be able to tell by that time. By the time you've heard that it's modal, the brain's already told you which is the closest interaction, because I think that's why it's happening. And then if it's dissonant, you know, it's a second or a seventh, right? And so see how you do. So you see the whole thing there, just kind of relax. Which one is this?
Second, second, third, 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 second, seventh, seventh, sixth, third.
Natural, third, good, third. How many of you guys thought that might have been a sixth? Good. And there's quite a few hands here, probably about 10. That is completely natural. That's because of the fact that the brain was expecting that there was going to be a sixth after I played the seventh. And it's actually quite a big change, so it's a completely natural thing. The opposite can happen. If I play a lot of seconds and thirds rather, it can suddenly happen that it can be difficult to hear the others, okay? So here we go. So this one is a sixth, sixth, third, good, third, third. Right. See it doing this? One thing for dissonant. Seventh, seventh,
third,
Okay, so good, you're hearing it's modal, listen. Good, okay, keep going. This is very, very good already. Sixth.
sixth, 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 third, third, sixth,
Good, sixth.
sixth,
Try not to try, I know that's hard. Sixth.
seven, seven, second, second, sixth,
Good, what do you think, everybody? Sixth. Do you notice that it's a cognitive law? Every time I went from a second to a sixth, it was hard because I changed both factors. I changed the fact that it was, oh my gosh, all of a sudden it's modal, but it's also the one that's looking up. Whereas I was just on a dissonant one that looked down. It's following absolute cognitive laws. It's predictable. And that's what Beethoven, Bach, Mozart, and any great composers banking on. They trust that we're hearing those things and understand how. Want to try another set of those so you get used to them? All right, so these are much more challenging. All right, so third. Good. Good, just use your ear. Seven. Good. Good. Awesome. Good. Now, what you might notice is every time you might have troubles, it's often because of the fact that the mind wanted to say something. And it was actually that we listened more to our own mind than we might have listened to the sound. And you fixed it beautifully. It takes a lot, but it's actually trusting Hubble. It's trusting that we have this capacity and that all you have to do is sort of relax and let that happen instead of that you have to be in any way second guessing. But it's completely natural when those things happen, and bravo for inhibiting when I made some of those shifts that time. What I'd like to do is the final factor. Now, in the next segment that we're going to do is we're going to really work on this final segment, okay, this last and third part. But before we do that, I wanted to talk to you about affect and the two factors we've covered so far. All right. So as I mentioned, when I was a child, like a clown, and of course we know it's dissonant now, and it's going at 8 hertz. But it's also at the same time very different than this, which is also a second, but it's one that's a half step smaller. So this is 2 semitones, and I'm going to call it a 2. This is 1, and they have vastly different characteristics, okay? So what I would observe is that I'm going to just ask you to do this physically, and then I'm going to explain it more after the break. But what I would ask you to do is to notice that you will actually feel when I play the 2, which is a major second, you will feel as if it's almost like the 2 pitches are like 2 magnets of like polarity. They're pushing apart. So let me show you what I mean. By the way, it's going to be true of the perfect fifth, the major third, the major sixth, so lots of different ones. You learn it here, you got it everywhere. So this is going to be my 2. So when you hear it, it feels vast, and that's why we can get so confused. It can be difficult sometimes to sing down a major second. You might have noticed that sometimes. And it will feel like it's a world away, but it's mostly because it's a harmonic di-chord, okay? So in other words, the 2 pitches are repelling one another so that it can sound much larger. By contrast, this is 11. That is a major 7. This can actually sound very small versus this. So this is 2 semitones, 2, 2, 2, 2, 11. So this is why we can, when we're really listening, become confused, because this factor actually relates not to the relative pitch distance, but to the overtone series of the bottom note. And I'll go into more in just a moment. But I want to ask you to try this. Now, real important, if you feel like, oh, I didn't quite get that, the idea is don't worry about that, because we're going to give plenty of opportunity for you to go deeper into it, and it will become easier and easier. So whatever you do, don't worry about it. It's great and helpful if you'll answer, even if you don't really know whether you can do it. Even if it's wrong, and I want to ask you to do that, because that's just feedback for me and for all of us. That's very helpful, and I would thank you for that. I'm going to ask you to tell me whether I'm playing a 2 or a 1. A 1, the upper note, is not in the overtone series of the bottom note, and it will feel like two magnets of opposite polarity going like that. So I liken it to the flavor of acid. Okay, but lemon, let's be nice. Lemon, okay, or pineapple. It's pungent, it's intense, and I say acidic. It also has this feeling of, as I mentioned, contracting, which is very important. The two pitches want to contract and merge into one another, okay? Whereas the 2, wow, the opposite. It's much more like alkaline flavors. That is to say, it would be much more like mashed potatoes. Very creamy. Sorry if somebody doesn't like mashed potatoes. Okay, so very fresh milk or cream or a cheese that's very mild. So it's very bland, or rice. Rices are good ones. So versus this. So the harmonic ones, the upper note is in the overtone series, and that's what the 2 is. So the 2 feels like it's harmonious with the bottom note, and it will feel as if it's expanding. So oddly enough, you can use your hand. So, and really pinching it together. 1, like 1, 1, 2, 2. Try it. 2, 2, 2, 2. Yeah. Nice and loud. Thank you. 2. Excellent. Good, good. Okay, good. Now we're going to do a 3 and a 4. Okay, and a 3 just means 3 semitones away, and 4, and it's modal. Okay, but they're going to have the same basic properties that the 1 and the 2 had, respectively. That is, do you notice with the 3? Even though the two pitches are far apart, it feels much more like they go together. Now you can only appreciate that. You know it's got 4 hertz. Modal, modal. Now watch this. The 4 feels vast, and that's because the 3, the upper note, if I play a C and I play an E flat, the E flat is not in the overtone series until high up. But E is the 5th partial, that is, that it's a very low overtone, the 4th overtone above C, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So ultimately, the 4 is going to just sound like it's alkaline and open, whereas the 3 is going to sound like it's going to have that same acidic character. So this, what I call harmonicity factor, is going to be another whole dimension that we're perceiving. So give it oral here. So this one is a, what do you think? What does your hand want to do? Right, so it's going to be a 4, 4, 4 semitones, 4, 4, 3, really 3, 3. Louder? Good, 3, good, you knew. 3, 4, good, relaxed. 4, excellent, 4. 4, good. So let your hand, your ear do it. Now we'll keep going and practicing. That's harder, isn't it? The 3s and the 4s are a lot harder. And I believe the reason that that might be the case is because of the fact that the modal effect softens the non-harmonic. What I mean is, this is lemon, straight out lemon on your tongue. This is sort of a lemon meringue pie, you know, sort of lemony, but not so lemony, okay? But this, whoa, what is that? That's the 4. That's, I don't know what that is. Maybe just the meringue on top of the lemon. Never thought of that. So it's just sort of bland versus, try it. Good, let's do some more of those guys. So this one is a 3, 3. This is real important because your ear is telling you feedback. 3, 4. Good, got it. 4. Good. 4, 4. Good. Awesome. Okay. So again, I'm like a chef when I'm making a piece of music. I'm tasting the ingredients in much the same way, and they have different expression. I'm going to continue my discussion of that, but I would like to finish with something that drives musicians crazy. Do any of you guys find it annoying to tell a fourth from a fifth? Have you ever had that problem? Yeah. So it's a common problem, certainly one I had before I understood a lot of this stuff. So what I found was that, guess what? The fourth is going to be this. The fifth is going to be that. Okay? So this is a hard thing to get used to, everybody. A fourth is 5 semitones. That's really hard to get. Ugh. And I can see that if I go from C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A perfect fourth is 5 semitones. And then a fifth would be from C to G. It's 2 semitones larger. It's a 7. I like this. It actually works well. I'm kind of a numerology freak. And so a 5 is actually the number of change and often war and so it heralding. Can you imagine using that this way? To me, when that happens, I'm going, this guy does not know, or she does not know what's going on here. Because to me, that doesn't sound like war. It's like, whoa, what's going to happen? Instead of like, that's what's going to happen. Okay, so when you hear the 5, it's going to do that. The 7, it's going to do that in a big way. All right. One of the reasons is the fourth, the upper note, is closer to the lower note than the octave. Okay? So it's closer to go from C to F than to go from F to C. That's called the inversion. It's a longer distance. And so the ear is going to have that F, that upper note pulling down. But on top of it, it's not in the overtone series. So on top of it, we have the two factors, the polarity wanting it to go down. But on top of it, we have this fact that it's non-harmonic, so acid. Okay, that intense contracting of the two magnets of opposite polarity, okay? The 7, whoa. The upper note, the perfect fifth, C up to G, is closer to this C than to this C. Therefore, it's really going to feel like the upper note's looking up, but on top of it, it's in the overtone series. So it's going to have that harmonic, open, alkaline quality. So here we go, 5 or 7, what do you guys think? Good, everybody? Good, 5. 7. 7. Ooh, listen, really? Little too, But I leapt up a fifth, which is why that happened, okay? So this is a 5, 5, 5, 5. Good, just trust your ear. Sev, sev, your body, sev. Louder. Excellent, thank you. Excellent, terrific, awesome. So they have vastly different qualities, and this might be the reason then I thought that was that warrior, or I was taught that, versus this, the monk. But they're both perfect, okay? So that's going to be a very important feature. We're going to do a couple more sets. This is a minor sixth. Okay, versus, okay? So the minor sixth is a half step larger, it's an 8. So it's modal. It's got that lovely modal quality, but boy, oh boy, it can feel much smaller than it is, which can make it interesting when I go to a sixth versus a third. So it feels small, and that's because it's clashing with an overtone, which we'll talk about. Your ear's hearing this. Now I won't play it after, I'll play it. I'm playing an overtone. Can you guys justify that I'm playing this overtone? No, I'm not. It's almost the same. And it's pungent, it's acid, it's got all those same characteristics of two magnets contracting. That's going to be our 8. And now a 9. A 9 is the major sixth, and it feels, not only is that upper note looking up, but on top of it, it's expansive, exactly. So here's my 9. So 9, 9, 9. Loud. Excellent. What do you guys think? Listen to your hand. Yes, good. So I'm going to ask you to do something. What you're experiencing is when the interval gets larger, do you start noticing you're just listening to the top voice, which is why I could do this? 8, 9, 9. It's because you're really hearing this more than you're hearing So what you have to do is, this is a trick that, again, great composers understand. Any interval over a fifth, or well, really a fourth, what happens is it bifurcates and it turns into a separate voice. It's like they split into two. And so that's something that Bach will use. So that he creates a sense of two different voices that are going on, okay? So, and it's using those larger intervals. So just try to think of yourself as, think of the bottom note and put yourself between, okay? So these are, here we go. What's this? What do you think? Lemon or mashed potatoes or potatoes? Yeah, everybody though. 8, 8, good. Good, really pinch it. 8. By the way, relax your hand to neutral. 8. Afterward. Good. 8. Good. 9. I'm going to go fast. 9. 9. You get ahead of yourself. Okay, good. Good for you. Awesome. So again, the idea is that you can really feel these almost like currents, but you have to stay extremely light. You notice that? If you're answering and you get heavy or you get ahead, it's problematic, but no problem. Just relax. I'm going to go really fast now, 8 or 9. Okay? So what I feel when I'm hearing them fast is I'm almost feeling like there's a, this expanding, almost undertow versus like that. So 8, 8, 8. 8. Good. Let it go. Louder? 9, 9. 9, okay? So when I now want to do the sevenths, they're going to be easier than the sixths. Sixths are the hardest, okay? Those are the hardest, and we will be working on those because, believe it or not, in the next hour, we're going to be telling whether this is a first or second inversion major chord at this speed based on that, okay? You want to try something? What do you think? You're going to say 8, 8, 8, 9, 9. Yeah, okay, so we'll be able to tell inversions of chords, and that's why that Mozart chord I talked about at the beginning is an 8 on the outside. And so it's got that, gripping and yet emotional at the same time, quality. Now, finally, the sevenths. Okay, so the weird thing is that, did you notice that the ones that were pinchy were always the smallest in a pair? It was the 1 that was pinchy and the 2 that was the expansive one. It was the 3 that was pinchy and the 4 that was expansive. It was the 5 that was pinchy and the 7, its mate, that's the expansive one. The 8 is the pinchy one, and the 9 is the expansive one. But not so with the sevenths. Okay, with the sevenths, what we have is something different. With the sevenths, what happens is that the minor seventh, which is a 10, is in the overtone series, whereas the 11 is not. Okay, it's the only time it flips. And of course, we already know about this. It's only a half step, the 11, that C up to B that I played for you guys, that's only a half step off of that octave, and so it really is doubly pinchy, all right? So tell me whether this is an 11, and you can do that same thing. It's a bizarre contradiction or paradox. It's going up at the same time it has this feeling of being really tight and acidic, lemony, versus listen, even if I play it loudly. Really loudly, right. 10, right, 10. easier, isn't it? Very good. Awesome. Which sounds larger, this or this? Okay, that's a 4 that I just played. All right, so this is what can really mess with a sensitive ear, is the fact that, darn it, the 4 sounds bigger than the 8. Okay, it isn't. So the way to get past that, as we'll be talking about, is really know, oh, but it's a third, the upper note's looking down and it's harmonic. But we have to be paying attention to all of its aspects to be able to make that work.